In August 1415 the English banners fluttered above the walls of Harfleur. The siege had dragged on for a month. The summer heat turned the trenches into open graves. Dysentery tore through Henry V's ranks. Men doubled over in the mud, armor rusting beside them. Yet the young king refused to lift the siege. "If Harfleur falls, France opens," he declared. When the city finally surrendered, the cost was ruinous. Thousands were dead or too sick to march. The campaign that had begun as conquest now bled into survival. Advisors urged retreat to England. Henry would hear none of it. To withdraw after such losses would signal weakness before Europe. "We shall march to Calais," he ordered, through enemy territory, across swollen rivers and villages stripped bare by French levies. The army that limped out of Harfleur numbered barely 6,000. Their faces were gaunt, their boots rotted, yet they followed a king who walked among them, sharing their rations and their prayers. Autumn rain began. Normandy's roads turned to rivers of clay. Horses sank to their knees, wagons toppled, and arrows spoiled in damp quivers. Farmers fled at the sight of the Red Cross flags. Smoke from burning villages trailed the column. The French used scorched earth to starve them. Each mile felt stolen. Scouts whispered of enemy patrols shadowing the rear, waiting for the perfect place to strike. At campfires, men spoke in low tones of ghosts seen along the hedgerows, fallen comrades from Harfleur calling them home. Hunger drove them to chew leather straps. Fever made them dream of warm hearths in Kent and Sussex. Henry moved through the camp without escort, cloaks soaked, speaking softly to the bowmen. "Hold fast," he said, "for our children shall speak of this road." His words steadied them more than food could. Crossing the Somme proved a nightmare. Bridges were destroyed, fords guarded. French forces cut them off from supplies. For days the English wandered south and west seeking a crossing. When they found one near Voyens, the river was chest-deep and icy. Men waded across clutching bows above their heads. 2 drowned, 3 wagons swept away. Still Henry pressed on, driven by faith and stubborn pride. Behind them, the French armies gathered, Orleans, Bourbon, Alsace, Burgundy, lords answering the crown's call for vengeance. Their numbers swelled past 30,000. They moved slowly but deliberately, knowing the English were trapped between rivers and forest. At every village, peasants reported English movements. Henry's scouts saw dust clouds on the horizon. The noose was tightening. Days blurred together in gray mist. The rain never ceased. Armor rusted, bowstrings slackened, bread turned to mold. The wounded were left behind with priests to hear their final prayers. Yet discipline held. The Longbowmen sang old campaign songs to keep pace, their voices rising through the downpour. Henry marched at the front, his standard-bearer trudging beside him through the muck. By late October they neared the village of Maisoncelles. Scouts returned breathless. A massive French host blocked the road ahead near Agincourt. Behind them another column cut off retreat. The king gathered his captains in a half-collapsed barn. "We are caught," said Sir Thomas Erpingham. Henry looked around the circle. "Then we make our stand here." Outside, thunder rolled as if answering him. That night, the English encamped in soaked fields. Fires sputtered in the rain. Archers stripped feathers from ruined arrows, hoping to dry them by the embers. Across the valley the French feasted, drums and laughter echoing through the dark. Henry's men listened in silence. Some whispered prayers, others sharpened stakes for the morning. The king knelt in his tent, Bible open to the Psalms. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Just before sunrise, the rain stopped. Fog hung low over the valley. Roosters crowed from unseen farms, a sound eerily peaceful amid what awaited. Henry mounted his horse and rode the line. "Good hearts," he called, "remember this day, for your deeds will live beyond your years." The archers cheered weakly, then gripped their bows. Across the mist, horns answered, the French were forming ranks. The impossible day had come. The ground between the English and French lines stretched less than 1,000 yards, hemmed in by dense woods on both sides. To the French, it seemed ideal, a perfect plain to ride down the invaders. To Henry it was salvation. The trees would prevent the French cavalry from flanking, and the rain had turned the field into a sucking swamp. He studied it in silence, then smiled faintly. "Let them come through the mud," he said. "The field will fight for us." At dawn, Henry gave the order for every archer to cut a stake from the nearby woods, 6 feet long, one end sharpened to a brutal point. They drove them into the mud before the English line, angled outward to impale charging horses. The men worked in silence, breath steaming in the cold. When they were done, they tested the stakes by leaning their full weight on them. They did not budge. The French army assembled like a living sea. 30,000 men in glittering ranks, banners of Burgundy, Orleans, and Alisal waving above the mist. The noise of their mustering filled the valley, armor clanging, horses neighing, priests chanting blessings. They were so numerous that the rear ranks could not even see the enemy. Confidence radiated through them. One noble laughed that they'd end the day by cutting off every English archer's 2 fingers. Henry's captains counted their ranks, barely 6,000, many too weak from fever to fight. The king moved among them, speaking little. He did not need to. Every man there understood what waited across the field. Yet none stepped back. They had marched through hell to reach this place. There was no road left but forward. Before sunrise, Henry ordered Mass. The chaplain's voice carried through the fog, words of absolution falling over mud and steel alike. When it ended, Henry knelt in full armor, head bowed. "If I fall this day," he whispered, "let it be for England, not for my crown." The men watched in silence. Their faith in him hardened into something unbreakable. Across the valley, the French nobles dined on roasted meat and wine. They mocked the English as half-dead invaders, their laughter rolling across the plain. Some argued over who would take Henry alive and claim the richest ransom. Few bothered to check the terrain or coordinate attack plans. Their pride was armor thicker than steel, and they believed no rain or mud could stop their victory. As dawn brightened, Henry removed his helmet and walked the English line. He stopped to speak with archers from Cornwall, men-at-arms from Wales, and foot soldiers from London. "You stand as lions today," he told them. "If you fight with honor, no man born of woman can shame you." He clasped hands, smiled through exhaustion, and rode back to his command post. The army straightened behind him. By mid-morning, the fog began to lift. The valley revealed itself, gray, glistening, and scarred with hoofprints from the restless French. The English stood motionless behind their stakes, arrows stuck in the ground before them, ready to draw. No drums sounded. The wind blew lightly from the English side, carrying their banners forward. It was as if nature itself favored them. A French herald rode forward under a flag of truce, demanding that Henry surrender before blood was spilled. Henry's reply was simple. "Tell your masters we will not move, nor beg mercy." The herald bowed and rode back. When he reached the French line, their horns blared in answer. The English archers raised their bows. Every man knew the signal had been given. For a brief instant the valley held its breath. No sound but the wind, the creak of leather, the muffled snort of horses. Men whispered final prayers. Henry lifted his sword and looked down the line. Across the field, the French began to advance, glittering ranks descending into mud. "Now," said Henry quietly. "God and St. George." The French began their march with the thunder of thousands of armored boots. The ground trembled under their advance, shields raised, banners high. Henry watched in silence, measuring distance by instinct. At 200 yards he gave the order. The sky filled with motion. Thousands of longbows bent like drawn ewes, strings snapping taut. Arrows screamed upward, vanishing into the mist before raining down like iron hail. They struck helmets, shoulders, horses. The sound was unearthly, a mixture of thunder and rain. Within seconds, the French front line staggered. Volley after volley followed, relentless. 12 shafts per man per minute. The air shimmered with movement, a storm of death that no shield wall could withstand. Horses reared and fell. Knights tripped over corpses and drowned in the mud. Some tried to charge forward, their armor weighing them like anchors. Behind them, new ranks pushed, unaware that the front was dying. Henry watched with grim satisfaction. The valley had become a funnel, narrowing the French advance. Each man that entered sank deeper into the mire, each step slower than the last. The first French line faltered, then collapsed. Men tried to pull their feet free only to lose their balance and fall, unable to rise beneath the crushing press behind them. The narrow field turned into chaos, shouts, orders, and panic drowned by the hiss of arrows. Some nobles attempted to rally, waving swords and banners, but their horses floundered. The longbows picked them off one by one. The pride of France, the armored elite, was being dismantled by mud and peasant archers. Henry rode along the line, shouting for the archers to hold their ground. "Let them come to us!" he bellowed. His voice cut through the din like a whip. The men obeyed. When the French front line finally reached the stakes, they found no easy prey. Only hardened men waiting behind a forest of sharpened wood and steel. The first knights impaled themselves or their horses on the stakes, collapsing in tangled heaps. Behind them came more, tripping over the dead. At last the French crashed into the English men-at-arms. The clash was deafening, metal on metal, grunts, screams. But the French were packed so tightly they could barely swing their swords. The English, lighter and better positioned, thrust upward into the joints of armor, striking at necks, armpits, and groins. The mud was waist-deep in places. Men sank and drowned where they stood. Horses screamed as they fell, crushing knights beneath them. Henry himself dismounted and fought among his soldiers, mud spattering his visor. "Press them!" he roared. Behind the melee, archers threw down their bows and joined the fight with mallets, hatchets, and daggers. They darted through the chaos, stabbing fallen knights through visors or levering helmets off with knives. The French could not fight back. Their armor had become cages. A chronicler would later write, "They were so entangled they could neither lift their arms nor take a single step." It was not a battle now. It was suffocation. Henry was struck in the head by a blow from a French knight, so fierce it cracked his crown-embedded helmet. For a moment he staggered. Another swung for the killing stroke, but a Welsh captain, Davy Gam, threw himself between them. The blade split his neck armor. He died saving the king. Henry fought on, shouting his name. The men saw it and redoubled their fury. Within an hour, the French vanguard was destroyed. Thousands lay dead or dying. The survivors were crushed by those behind them, desperate men trying to push forward with no space to fight. The valley was a nightmare of writhing bodies and sinking armor. Henry ordered the archers to advance and fire at will. Their arrows struck the flanks, turning retreat into massacre. The mud drank everything: blood, sweat, and pride. The Duke of Alençon led the second French line forward, determined to avenge the fallen. He fought with ferocity, cutting through several English men-at-arms before being surrounded. Henry himself met him blade to blade. Alençon struck the king's shoulder, nearly felling him, before being slain by Henry's guard. When his banner fell, the French morale broke for good. Across the field, horns sounded retreat, but there was nowhere to run. By midday the valley was unrecognizable. The churned earth had become a pool of crimson mud, armor glinting beneath the sun that finally broke through the clouds. Thousands of bodies lay in heaps. The English stood gasping, caked in filth and disbelief. They had expected death. Instead, they had achieved the impossible. Henry removed his helmet, his face pale and hollow. "God has judged us kindly," he said. "But I fear what he has seen." The field did not go silent after victory. It howled. Thousands of wounded Frenchmen cried for help, their voices rising from the heaps of bodies. Some begged for priests, others for water, others only for death. English archers moved among them, stripping armor and weapons to keep or sell. A few ended suffering quickly with knives. The air was thick with the stench of blood, rot, and rain. Henry ordered his captains to gather the survivors. They found barely a handful of wounded Englishmen still breathing among the corpses. The king dismounted to speak with each, his gauntlet hand on their shoulders. "You have done more for England this day than all the Lords of Parliament combined," he said. Some smiled through cracked lips, others could only nod. Hundreds of French nobles were taken alive, wealthy men whose ransoms could pay for castles. They were herded together under guard, the Duke of Orleans, the Duke of Bourbon, the Count of Eu, and others who had commanded armies. The contrast was stark, ragged English archers standing over jeweled knights worth fortunes. Henry ordered them treated with dignity but not released. Just after noon, a shout rose from the rear of the English line. Scouts had seen movement in the woods, perhaps a new French force approaching. Panic rippled through the weary men. Henry looked to the prisoners. If another attack came, they could turn weapons on their captors. With no time to verify the threat, the king made a brutal decision. Henry commanded that all prisoners, save the highest-ranking nobles, be executed immediately. His captains hesitated, horrified. "It must be done," Henry insisted. "We have neither men nor strength to guard them." Reluctantly, the archers carried out the order. Cries rose once more across the field, not of battle, but of helpless slaughter. When the alarm proved false, the horror of what had been done settled over them all. That evening Henry walked alone among the dead. The mud squelched beneath his boots, littered with broken arrows and torn banners. He paused beside Davy Gam's body and removed his own cloak to cover him. "You saved your king," he whispered, "and your king will not forget." The rain began again, gentle, almost cleansing. Yet no washing could remove the memory of that day. As the sun sank, Henry ordered Mass once more. The chaplain's voice trembled as he read from the Psalms. The men knelt in silence, armor-dented, hands raw. Henry removed his helmet and joined them in the mud. "Not to us, Lord, but to thy name be the glory," he said. The prayer spread through the ranks like a wave. Even the dying murmured it. When darkness fell, no songs were sung. Fires burned low, casting dim light on the heaps of armor and flesh. Some men wept quietly, unable to sleep. Others stared into the flames, minds still trapped in the chaos of battle. Across the valley, wolves came down from the hills, their eyes glinting red in the firelight. No one stopped them. At dawn, scouts confirmed what Henry already knew: the French army was gone. The survivors had fled in every direction, leaving their dead behind. The flower of French chivalry had been crushed. News would take days to reach Paris, but its impact would last centuries. The banners that had once ruled Europe now lay in the mud of a single French field. Henry ordered the dead buried where they fell. Pits were dug hastily, filled with knights and archers alike. The king stood over the first trench as the earth covered them. "Let no man say this was our doing alone," he said. "The hand of God has moved here." Then he turned north toward Calais. The men followed, their steps heavy, their faces hollow. The valley behind them would forever be called Agincourt. 2 days after the battle, the English counted the fallen. Nearly 10,000 French lay dead, the Constable of France, 3 dukes, 5 counts, and hundreds of knights. On the English side fewer than 400 were lost. Scribes recorded names as best they could, inking them onto damp parchment. Each list seemed a miracle written in mud and blood. Pits were dug until the shovels bent. Armor was stacked in heaps before being melted down. Banners were cut into strips for bandages. Henry ordered that no songs be sung and no trophies taken. "The Lord has won this day," he said. "Not we." When the last grave was filled, the men looked out over the valley and saw only smoke rising where honor had died. The march north was a procession of ghosts. Every mile took them past villages that had once mocked their weakness. Now doors opened in silence. Peasants watched them pass, faces pale. The English carried their wounded in wagons and their dead in memory. When Calais' walls finally appeared, the men fell to their knees. They had left England as soldiers and returned as legends. Word reached Paris like a plague. At first no one believed it. An English army of 6,000 had destroyed the might of France? When confirmation arrived from survivors, Church bells tolled not for victory but for mourning. Mothers and wives crowded the cathedral steps, praying for sons who would never return. The French court fell into shock and silence. Across the Channel, bells rang from Dover to York. Henry's arrival was met by cheers and hymns. Chroniclers compared him to David and Joshua. The common folk called him God's own king. Processions lined the streets of London. But Henry marched through them quietly, his armor unpolished, his eyes on the ground. He knew glory was always purchased with grief. Within months, scribes across Europe recorded the story. They wrote of mud, discipline, and divine favor. French poets lamented chivalry's end. English ones praised the bowmen who had humbled kings. In monasteries, monks painted miniatures of the battle in red and gold. History had already become legend. Years later, old archers told their grandchildren of the rain and the mud, of the sound of arrows striking like drums. Many had lost fingers to the bowstring. They wore the scars as crowns. In taverns, their stories grew with each telling until Agincourt became a myth of its own. But when they were alone, their voices lowered. They spoke not of victory, but of those who had sunk beside them and never rose. In the years that followed, Henry conquered Normandy and won a French princess's hand. Yet he often returned in thought to Agincourt. Witnesses said he kept a small cross made from an archer's stake on his table. On quiet nights he would touch it and murmur, "This was where God tested us." He died young, never seeing the kingdom he had dreamed of uniting. 6 centuries later, the fields of Agincourt are green and peaceful. Farmers till the same soil that once swallowed armies. On foggy mornings the earth still gives up fragments, arrowheads, buckles, pieces of mail. Visitors walk quietly among them, feeling the weight of the past beneath their feet. The name Agincourt became a symbol of impossible odds overcome by discipline and faith. It inspired kings, generals, and dreamers for generations. Every age finds its own Agincourt, its moment when the few must stand against the many. And somewhere in that moment, muddy and cold, Henry's men still stand shoulder to shoulder, longbows raised against the storm.